So whenever you see this icon during the presentation, this is a moment where you can pause the video and actually go and practice in the database yourself. So again, use the email that was sent to you to pull up the link and your username and password, and you can go to the database, take a pause on the video, and just practice going through the section that we just covered. So at this point, go ahead and pause and take a few minutes to practice on your own. All right, so now that you've done the screening, I want to just really quickly go through a few questions and just decide whether a person is eligible for the study. So we'll go through this together. There's a 36-year-old female who was assaulted by her ex-boyfriend. They used to live in the same residence, but they moved into separate apartments 6 months ago. Would this person be eligible or ineligible? Take a minute to think about it. So this person will be eligible. She does not currently live with the person, and so it is okay for her to enroll in the study. The next one is a 54-year-old female who meets all the eligibility criteria, except she's unwilling to provide a blood sample. Would this person be eligible or ineligible? So this person is ineligible. They have to be willing to provide a blood sample. Even if they're willing to provide it later, they have to be willing to provide it at the initial assessment. Last one, 29-year-old female who lives 75 miles away. She says she could come in for follow-up assessments because she takes classes on campus 10 minutes away from the clinic. Would this person be eligible or ineligible? So for this one, I said possibly eligible. Remember, this one is just about your judgment. So if it sounds reasonable to you, if the person seems like they would do whatever they're saying they would do, that's fine. This one is, she kind of does live far away, but if it sounds like she is on campus pretty much every day, and it sounds like it would be pretty easy for you to schedule an appointment, then that's fine. We just want to make sure that the person is able to follow up. All right, so the next section is the initial consent, and we'll talk about that for a few minutes. Again, the initial consent, it has 4 parts. So basically, we're asking the person to agree to, for us to call them in a few days, to answer a few questions about their pain, to draw their blood, and to access their medical record related to the assault. Consenting in research is similar to consenting in during a SANE exam, and the reason I say that is because we just want to make sure that people understand exactly what we're going to be asking of them and what's expected of them. And we do this for several reasons. And remember that consent is an ongoing process. So as the study goes on over the next year, there may be times where a person forgets pieces and parts of what you told them at the beginning, which is totally understandable and something that we work to kind of remind them just so that they know, again, what's expected of them the entire time. And so the reasons for this is that, number one, it's the ethical thing to do, right? We want to make sure that people understand that we will be what we'll be doing with their blood sample, what we'll be talking to them about, the questions that they'll be answering, etc. But it also makes sure that later on during the study, if they do know what's expected of them, they're more likely to follow up because they know what's going to happen. There aren't any surprises, and they know someone's going to be calling them and trying to set up another appointment. So the person has to have the chance to read the entire consent form from start to finish, and we've sort of set this up in a way that makes it easy for you as the RA to do. We've included a consent script in the database as well as in the initial assessment packet, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second, but that form sort of bridges the gap between the kind of lengthy consent form that you'll put in front of the person to let them read, and we'll sort of hit the highlights out loud so that they understand all the pieces. And again, you'll want to give them a chance to discuss it with you, read it, the whole form, and also ask questions. So here's an example. This is in your Ziploc bag in front of you, the initial assessment packet, and this is the top of the consent script for the initial assessment. And so this is what you'll be using and reading from, and you can read right from this form if you want to. Just make sure you hit all of the points on this form. And then this document is what should be right behind your initial consent script, which is the actual form itself. And there's a signature page at the back of this form that you'll have the person sign, but this is what you'll put in front of the person to let them read through. And there are actually 2 copies of this form in your packet. You'll have them sign both of them. You'll keep a copy, and you'll also send them home with a copy. So they have to go home with a signed consent form. We've placed 2 in your packet to make it easy, but if you'd rather have them sign once and make them a copy of the form after they've signed it, that's fine. We just find that sometimes it's easier to just have them sign twice, and then you don't have to get up and find a copier. So the next page that's there, that's behind the consent form, there are actually 2 copies of this as well, because same deal, you'll have them sign both copies, give them one, and take one for us. The HIPAA authorization is separate from any HIPAA authorization that you would have at your hospital. This is how we'll access their medical record and what we'll do with it for research purposes. And so actually in the consent script document, which is this form that we've talked about before, at the very end of this form on the last page, there's actually a very short script that you can use to explain the HIPAA document and give them a chance to read this form before they sign. So at this point, I want you to take out all the consent forms. It would be really a good process to just go through and read through the consent script at this point. Even if it, seems a little bit silly to read it out loud, it is helpful. And if you're sitting there and you're doing the training with someone else, you can even get into partners and talk it through with someone else, because we find that as people read through it, questions come up and we want to be able to answer them. And you can call me or email me with any questions that you have related to the consent script or the consent forms after you're finished with the training. All right, so at this point, once you got through the screener, you should be able to get to a screen that has all the consent documentation, which was in the database at the end of the screening section. And so go ahead and pull the database back up and make sure that you document all of the consent process. So the things that it will ask for are the date and time this consent was signed, that the person received a copy of the consent, and then the date the HIPAA was signed, and that the person received a copy of the HIPAA.